Hello everyone, my name's Craig Hamilton. I'm a researcher from the Birmingham Centre for Media and Cultural Research at Birmingham City University, and along with Patricia Rozbicka from Aston University and Adam Baer from Newcastle University, I'm one of the researchers on the PEC-funded project, the UK live music industry in a post-2019 era, a globalised local perspective, otherwise known as the Birmingham Live Music Project. And in my paper today, which goes alongside those from Adam and Pat, which you'll hear on this panel, I'm going to focus on one of the main outputs of the project, which is an interactive map of live music venues in the Birmingham area. In my talk, I'm going to try and do three things in my 15 minutes or so. I'll first of all briefly talk about my approach and how I brought that to the project and how we used it in the project, which in short involves the use of data-derived methods in popular music studies research. Then I'll go into a bit more detail about the creation of the map itself and point towards some resources that we use, but also some that we've developed in the project that you might want to use in your own research. And then I'll close with a reflection on the process and we'll outline some next steps. Now, before I start, it's probably going to be useful for me to show you the map, so you've got a good idea of what it is that I'm going to be talking about. The link to the map is in my slides over there. You can see, so you can visit that later. But here's what it looks like. It launched on the 1st of June 2020, and it's built around this map interface, which shows venue information for venues with B prefix postcodes. So when you click on a dot on the map, it will show you things like the venue address, the nearest train station, and so on, along with external links to the venue's website or Facebook or social media pages. There's also a venue database area, which is the same information but in table form, which can be searched by parliamentary constituency or keywords. And users to the map can kind of subset it themselves by venue type. So if you select a particular type of venue, they will appear or disappear from the map. And also there's an area where visitors can add a venue that might be missing from our map, or can amend or suggest amendments to data that we've got already in the map. So it might be an incorrect address or something like that. Okay, so that's the map that I'm going to be talking about. But before I get to that, I'll talk briefly about how, as a researcher, I approach this and how we've unfolded some of those things into the research process as a team. The majority of my research focus over the last 6, 7, 8 years has been on what Hartman and colleagues called data-derived business models, and they are business models that use data as a key resource. Okay, and I'm interested in the role of those types of technologies and business models in the field of popular music, whether that's how music is monetized or distributed, or through things like my work on the Harchive project, how people who consume music have different experiences or experiences that are transposed to those digital environments. Those are the sort of things I'm interested in. Now, the sort of broader context for that is probably doesn't need explaining to an audience such as this, but you know, we all know that over the last sort of 20-25 years, there are a lot of companies that have emerged and a lot of services that have emerged that would fall under the heading of a DDBM. So whether that's Spotify or social media or various others. And I won't go into a massive literature review on this, but again, because I'm sure you're all aware of this stuff, but Wickstrom, Prey, and many others have written about either new business models or the way consumers are changing behaviour based on the emergence of these DDBMs. My particular approach to these big set of questions has been to take a practice-led approach. So what I wanted to do in my research was kind of look under the hood, if you like, and try and work out how these technologies worked from a practical point of view, and to use that as a way of trying to understand the benefits, consequences, affordances, and so on of these technologies. So essentially by trying to figure out what made them tick, I could maybe come at them from a slightly different angle. And that's involved me picking up some skills that perhaps would be more usually associated with something like data science. So that's things like automated data collection, the use of unsupervised machine learning algorithms, creating web interfaces like the map. So, for example, in trying to work out how people react to automated recommendation algorithms, I use some algorithms of my own and sent my own data through that to try and work out what type of knowledge those sort of things produce. So that's broadly the sort of area of research that I'm coming at this project from. Okay, hopefully that's clear, but we'll see. And okay, so we'll talk now about the creation of the map. So within the project, over the 10 months lifetime of the project, which runs until December this year, 2020, we devised a 5-stage data collection and manipulation and analysis process. We began with a period of web scraping, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a second. We then, along with a team of student assistants, engaged in some manual research using some online searching, so through Google and so on. And it was those 2 phases that gave us the data that's in the map that I've just showed you. We're now, with the launch of the map, in a crowdsourcing phase, so we're asking stakeholders within the local Birmingham music industries, but also music fans, to add additional data to the map. We'll then go through a process of verifying that data alongside adding additional bits of data, which I'll talk about as well, which will then ultimately produce a second version of the map at the end of the project, which we hope will provide the first real comprehensive picture of the live music landscape in the city of Birmingham. Okay. So the first phase, which I'll talk about, there's more detail on this in a web post on my personal website, which is here, and I'll walk through the entire process of how we got this data. But we looked at a service called Songkick, which I'm sure many of you will be aware of, is a concert discovery service which people can enter in their favourite artists or their location, and it shows them up and coming concerts in their area. As a brief aside, the sort of story of Songkick is exactly the sort of thing that I'm interested in. It started live as a tech startup. It's now owned by Warner Music Group. Along the way, there were legal wrangles over selling tickets with Live Nation. So that's the sort of, it's the sort of thing I kind of find fascinating. But for the purposes of this project, Songkick has an API, an application programming interface, which is something that enables developers and software engineers to sort of access and repackage the data that Songkick has within its system. So this enables artists to sort of embed their tour information onto their website, for example, and rather than having to manually update that if a show is sold out or a venue date changes or something like that, because it's pulled in from the Songkick API, it's always up to date. Okay. As with a lot of APIs, Songkick provide access to that, and that's what I talk about in this post here, is how we accessed and pulled down a bunch of information about music venues in the city of Birmingham through that API. And very, very briefly, the way that worked is that you can pull in concert information for a given metro area for a 3-month period. And we pulled in 864 upcoming concerts just before the COVID shutdown. And within each of those records for an upcoming concert, there was a venue ID, and so we used the API again to pull in the venue information. Okay, so based on that that process, and there were some duplicates within those 125, we ended up with 108 venues, or detail on 108 venues in the Birmingham area. Again, sort of related to my sort of area of interest, there were 3 issues with that process. The first is that, and I think this relates to kind of who owns Songkick, and but also broader issues of data ownership, is that that picture was incomplete. Okay, the only venues we were able to pull in from the API of Songkick were those that, by and large, were plugged into sort of industry mechanisms, so owned by labels or promoters or linked into ticketing. The other thing was that some of that data was incomplete, and the third issue is that there were restrictions from the Songkick API on how that data could be used. So it couldn't be stored, it couldn't be combined with other data, and so on. So instead, we use that data as basically as a guide for our student research team to go and find the information again. So essentially, they duplicated that data through manual searches. They then, armed with those 108 venues, they then found a further 90 venues that weren't in the Songkick API, and they searched basically on a postcode by postcode basis in the Birmingham area and got additional venues. But they also started to find information that wasn't in the Songkick API, so data points that weren't in that API that related to things that the project is interested in right now, which is, for example, an example being the outdoor space status of a venue with the COVID-19 restrictions in mind. So we're adding those sort of things to the database at the moment. That database then enabled us to produce the map that I've showed you, and very, very briefly, this was coded in the R programming language, which is a statistical computing programming language, and this is open source, and is what I've used in a lot of other my research. And the interesting thing about R is that rather like apps in the Apple App Store, if there's a particular computational function that you want to perform, then somebody within the wider R community has developed an app for that. Okay, and in R, those apps are called packages. So if you want to scrape data from Twitter, for example, there's an R package for that. If you want to create graphs, there's an R package for that, and so on and so forth. And that enabled us to put together a local copy of the map, which was then put together in a web application through another piece of the R environment, which is called Shiny, and it was then deployed on a cloud server so that other people could visit it. So that's quite a sort of an involved process, and again, if you want more information on that, I've provided a sort of a detailed technical walkthrough of that process. And as with the Songkick API scraping process, they're both replicable. So the way that we've presented it as a project essentially means that you could take the code and the process that we've used, and you could apply it to any city, anywhere. If you were using the Songkick data, it would have to be a Songkick process. It would have to be a city that was covered by Songkick, but most countries and most cities are. So yeah, that's one of the things that we really wanted from the project, was to create replicable processes. The walkthrough here, again, you can read at your leisure, but it's broken down into various parts. And you can sort of take the code and do what you like with it, develop it, augment it, change it, improve on it, hopefully. So that's the map, that's how we got there. what does that kind of mean, I suppose, for the project and for popular music studies? Well, I think the first thing to say is that I see these kind of methods very much as things that can augment our existing approaches to popular music studies rather than replacing them. I think it's a way of approaching questions of ownership, control, power, culture, what have you, from a slightly different angle. And there are a lot of other scholars kind of working in this broad area who kind of agree and see the benefit of collaborative work. So Housley and colleagues really are saying that you get the best from both worlds by combining these kind of approaches with other approaches that we might want to use in popular music studies. So going further than that, Andrew Piper argues that there's a reciprocal benefit available if cultural scholars and computational people, processes kind of come together. So not only can cultural scholars benefit from the sort of computational processes that I've described, but also the approaches that we have as cultural scholars can have a beneficial impact on the way that these systems are developed, okay? Because we perhaps ask questions or come from an angle that a programmer or a business model might not do. So that's kind of where I'm trying to get to with my research, and particularly through this process. And in terms of sort of sharing the detail behind what we've created, Sandvig and Hargitay argue that scholars involved in this kind of work should be prepared and happy to share what they call the messy detail or the bench work of that kind of work, because and this is certainly true of my experience in learning the data science skills around R and all that sort of stuff, is that I've kind of benefited from the work other people have done in terms of sharing their code, sharing their approaches. And that's what we're trying to do with this project, is to share what we've come up with so far, so that other projects that want to look at live music in other urban areas or geographical areas don't have to start from a completely completely blank piece of paper. They can build on what we've done. Which kind of leads me on to something that I think that Adam and Pat and I would really like to develop beyond the lifetime of the current project, is that, are there other scholars interested in live music research that we can work with? Is this useful to them? Because we would like you to take it and replicate it or build upon it, improve upon it. Because we think that there's a potential for the map that I've shown you to have data from not just Birmingham, but other cities within the UK, within the wider European Union, and perhaps even beyond that. Because if we can kind of work together on pulling in data related to music venues in a way that makes it easy to combine and easy to compare, we can come up with some really useful collaborative data-led studies and otherwise, and together begin to work on some responses or some assistance for the live music sector, which at the moment we're seeing that it desperately needs post-COVID, and with the looming presence of Brexit coming soon and all the problems that might go along with that. Can these sort of approaches that in the first instance demonstrate that there is a live music ecology and it can be measured to an extent and demonstrated to an extent, how does that benefit stakeholders and the people who enjoy live music? So that's kind of where we're trying to get to. A bit of a bibliography there. So if you'd like to discuss working with us on the map or on future projects, you can reach us there. I'll provide links under the YouTube video to all of the various pages that I've talked about. Hope you found this useful. This is a very novel experience to try and deliver a paper in this way, but hopefully it makes sense, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this panel and the rest of London Calling. Thanks very much.